Welcome back to the Create From Rest podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Fehrenbach, and this is episode 58. Today is June 23rd. It's a Tuesday, and I am batch recording podcast episodes. So if you happen to be watching on YouTube and see that I'm wearing the same shirt in multiple episodes, that is why. So when I first heard about batch creating, which is simply doing a certain task multiple times to ride the momentum, so to speak, it was in this context of utilizing this tool to get ahead in the work so that when life shows up, the work can keep going. Essentially, it was told to me as a tool to help with work-life balance. The interesting thing I've realized over the years is that work-life balance is actually kind of a myth. There's no such thing as work-life balance, and it's really a phrase that I think we should just get rid of in our vocabulary. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So what's the problem with work-life balance? That phrase, work-life balance. Well, let's start with, I have three tension points, actually, that it creates when we use this phrase, work-life balance. The first being is that it turns work into a necessary evil. It's something that we just have to do so that we can go live our lives. It's this idea of putting work over here on one side and our life over here on the other, as if work doesn't exist within our life, like that working is not living. It's the thing that you produce and create and you do to serve, but it's separate from your actual life, the part that you're living. It's just something you do so that you can go live. But see, the thing is, God did not give that directive to humanity. And when we minimize work into just something we have to get through, something we survive in order to go live our best life, when we do that, we miss the beauty of being human. We miss the fact that we were created to be image bearers, that we were created to reflect a creative God, that the work itself is part of our divine directive, our divine purpose as humans. When we put work over here and life over here, we've put them in tension with one another. They're competing against one another, and we miss the core of what it means to be human. The second thing this phrase does is it makes it sound like life should be effortless, right? If work is the hard thing that we have to do so that we can go enjoy our life, it kind of stands to reason that life isn't hard, that it's supposed to be kind of effortless. It's something that just flows naturally. Your relationships, your health, caring for your home, caring for your community, this seems like it should just flow naturally, right? But the reality is all four areas of your life, body, home, work, fields, all of them require a stewardship, and stewardship requires effort, and it requires tending, and it requires cultivation. When we think about a garden, things don't grow without effort. When you think about cultivating a home environment that helps you and your family thrive, that takes effort. That takes some work. When you're talking about building community, building relationships with others, that takes work. Marriages take work. Stewarding your body and its health takes work. It takes effort. It takes tending to. When the thing that we think should be effortless now requires some effort, maybe even you find it challenging, we can either think we're doing something wrong or we can throw in the towel and call ourselves a failure because it's not supposed to be this difficult. But that's just not true. The third thing that it does is it puts creating in competition with living. If you're listening to this podcast, it's very highly likely that you are a creative individual. God has tasked you with a calling that involves creating something, whether that's building a business, writing a book, making jewelry, painting, whatever it may be. You have some kind of creativity that you're investing in with the thought that it's going to produce something. And so we would call that a field. We would name that work. The problem is when we have this work-life balance phraseology, we then see the creating as something that is meant to be hard and challenging and full of effort, and living as to not be that, right? So you have this really weird thing where either one, you feel guilty because the creating is actually really fun and enjoyable and sometimes can feel very effortless and it doesn't feel like you're working. So then you feel kind of guilty that you're doing this thing that you really enjoy doing when in calling it work, when you should be living like the effortless enjoyment, whatever should be in the living category. Or you can feel the guilt of that you're creating has to go into a work bucket and that's stealing time, right? Because work and life are in conflict with one another, stealing time away from the other categories of living. And you can feel guilty about, oh, well, I need to work on this creative. I need to put words on a page. I've got a book deadline to hit. Well, now I'm stealing away from my life, right? Because I'm working instead of living. And then here's the bonus one I just thought of. When you have this phraseology of work-life balance, there's no room for rest because you either are supposed to be working or enjoying life. And the concept that you should be stopping is and resting feels like an outlier that we can't feel okay doing. We feel guilty because if we're resting, we're not working, but we're also not living and enjoying our life and taking care of our life. And so it's this really weird tension point. So if work-life balance is a phrase that I think we should get rid of, what should we call it? We know that there is some kind of balance that we're supposed to be aiming for because we know when we've crossed it. We know when the scales are tipped slightly. We know when things are out of whack. If it's not work-life balance, what is it then? I would argue that we actually have to reframe how we think of a week. We have to reframe how we think about work, and we have to rethink what we think about rest. So let's start there. Let's start with reframing a week. If you've been listening to me for any amount of time, you might have heard me talk about the 1-to-6 ratio. This is a value of our family. This is something that is kind of a pillar of how we operate. Now, the 1-to-6 ratio is 1 day of rest to 6 days of tending. We shifted to this model back when we first started a 24-hour Sabbath because we recognized that the current model of 5 days of work and 2 days of just enjoyment was actually not biblical. When we look at the Bible's framework for the week, God set out and he created 1 day of rest where he said, hey, y'all, like, y'all need to stop. Like, just stop working. Have a posture of dependence on me. Like, don't do these things that produce some kind of provision. Don't do things that produce provision. And he put that framework in place for them. And then he said the other 6 days, tend to your lives. And so we took that framework and we said, okay, what would it look like if we stopped looking at our weekends as 2 full days of rest and instead looked at it as 1 day of rest, and we'll talk a little bit more about what does that actually mean, and 6 days of tending. Now, I used to say 1 day of rest, 6 days of creating, and I've actually shifted to saying tending because when I said creating, it almost sounded like every single day you have to create something new, and that's not what I mean by this. I mean, every day, the 6 days of the week, you need to be tending to the areas of stewardship that you have. And I actually have even more so expanded this to say that we have been given 4 stewardship areas of our lives: our body, our home, our fields, and our tables. And when we were given those 4, and we were given them to take care of and steward within the construct of a week, of a day of rest and 6 days of tending. Those areas of stewardship never stop being stewarded. It just shifts in how it looks. So the 1 day of rest, it looks like delighting in those areas of stewardship. And the other 6 days of the week, it looks like tending to that stewardship. This is not just management of something. This is growing something. This is moving things forward to a place of thriving, multiplying, producing, being fruitful, growing, cultivating, expansion. These are the things that we're trying to do with our stewardship. And that requires us to have a reframe of the week. So a reframe to 1 day of rest and 6 days of tending. We also have to have a reframe of what exactly is work, what is creating, We need to stop calling the things that produce income work and everything else living, when the reality of what we've been tasked with as humanity is work, is to create, is to cultivate, is to tend to. We talked about this in the last episode. We have these areas of stewardship. That's the work. God did not call us to show up to a job and then live our lives. He did not call us to work-life balance. He called us to a life of creative stewardship across all 4 areas and said, tend to these well these 6 days, and on the 7th day, rest and delight in what that is. That's the third reframe. You have to reframe what rest is. Rest, Sabbath rest, is beyond just taking a break. It's beyond just stopping. I know we get caught up in that because the Hebrew word that Sabbath comes from literally means to stop. But if you start to look at the context of where the directive to Sabbath comes from, it's always within the sense of stopping the things that provide for you and trusting God as your provider. We most clearly see this in the story about manna, which, interestingly enough, happens before the 10 Commandments are even given. And so I think that's important to note, because even then God was asking the Israelites to trust him, to act differently than all others by setting aside a day to trust the Lord as provider. And I think that this is crucial and important for us to remember, that we have to set aside a day to reflect on God as provider, because the very first act of disobedience in the Bible is literally a act that goes against God as provider. Adam and Eve wanted to know all that they needed to know. If you know everything, if you're the smartest person in the room, you don't need anybody else in the room, right? And if we have all the knowledge, if we become like God, as the serpent tempted Eve with, we are tempted then to think of ourselves as the creator of the universe and not just his image bearers. And that is what Sabbath rest, true Sabbath rest, gives us. It's a mindset shift from everything that I have is of my own effort. I keep going forward. I keep doing in order to have. And instead say, you know what? The world does not rest on my shoulders. The work will still be there when I'm done resting. I rest because God has already gone before me and is my provider, my redeemer, my faithful God who never leaves me nor forsakes me. That's what rest is. It's a posture. It's a posture of dependency. And so when we're talking about taking a full day of resting, one of the ways that I've heard others describe it is taking a day to delight in the work. I like to think of it as that I tend to these 4 areas of stewardship through those 6 days with the Lord. And then on the 7th, I rest with the Lord and delight in what we have already done together and what he will continue to do, because he is my faithful provider. And I know that my job is to show up and be obedient, but he's the one that's going to bring about the harvest. That's what a day of rest can give us. It can give us the right posture to go about tending to the stewardship of our lives the rest of the week. This reframe from moving from the work-life balance to this 1-to-6 ratio is more than just a reframe. It's more than just a mindset shift. It's actually a rhythm of life. It's a rhythm of stewardship. There's no work side and life side. There's only creating and resting. Creating covers all areas of stewardship of your life, and resting is delighting in what's been created and what's been stewarded. 1 day of rest, 6 days of creating. That's the create from rest rhythm. And let me tell you, when you embrace this rhythm, at first you might be like, I can't do that. I can't have 1 full day of rest, not doing any work whatsoever, and then 6 days of work. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. It actually gives you more time to work with, especially if you treat your 24-hour Sabbath as an evening to an evening instead of a whole day, because you have time in there where you're sleeping too. And so it really doesn't take that much time away from you. It really, when I get done, I'm like, really, can we have more Sabbath time, please, Lord? Like, I really do. Sometimes I get to the end of Sabbath and I'm like, I really wish Sabbath could be extended. And I think that's why there was periods of time in the Bible where these festivals where they were essentially extended Sabbath periods. And I think that that's really God knew that there would be times where we needed more than just 1 day of rest. But I think the hardest part is identifying what work is. And I think that if you can shift from this idea that work is just the thing that makes us money, especially if you are a stay-at-home mom. If you are a stay-at-home mom with especially with younger kids who depend a lot on you, this I think is one of the hardest things to navigate, is because I think we put so much in an effort to value what we do as stay-at-home moms, we end up calling things work that are really just home management. It's just an area of stewardship of our home. And so we call it work, but it's not really work. And so it's not something that we're investing in order to produce something. And so we're putting this emphasis on work, on things that cannot stop. Like, we still have to eat on the day of rest. We still have to, like, not have a home be completely filthy on the day of rest. Like, we still have to take care of our bodies and shower and go to the bathroom. Like, these things do not stop. Our bodies still have to be stewarded. Our homes still have to be stewarded. Our communities and relationships still can be stewarded. And our fields, that's the part that I think the Lord was emphasizing we need to stop, because there's an intentionality that we're investing in those things in order to have some kind of provision. I definitely struggled with this at first. When we first started practicing a 24-hour Sabbath and shifting to this 1-to-6 ratio for our week, a 1-to-6 rhythm of 1 day of rest, 6 days of creating, when we shifted to this rhythm for our lives, it was kind of difficult at first to identify, what do I stop on these Sabbath rest days? And so it's trial and error. We had to trial and error it. But I do remember thinking, like, Lord, I just don't understand. Like, my job as a mom never stops. Like, I can't ever stop the work. Like, how am I supposed to get rest? Like, this is the problem with this whole concept. I remember, like, arguing with the Lord about this one day. And he just kind of stopped me in my tracks, and he's like, Rachel, do you go to the bathroom? Do you have to take a shower? He's like, do you still have to eat? I'm like, yes. He's like, your kids depend on you right now. Of course that's not going to stop on Sabbath. Those are the same things for them. It just shows up differently because they cannot care for themselves right now. Your baby, you have to change their diaper just like you have to go to the bathroom. And I was like, this is so true. I need to stop looking at changing diapers as work. I use this example for a reason. And even if you're not in the throes of littles, even if you have older kids, if you are a mom, you are dealing with some version of this. Because I heard a pastor literally say that your work, mom, is to change the diapers. There's a holy work in the mundane. You changing the diapers, the feeding of the kids, this is holy work. It's mundane, it's everyday work, but there's something holy in it. And do not get me wrong, there is something holy in stewarding our children's lives. But it's holy because it's creative stewardship of an area of our lives, and our kids depend on us, not because us changing diapers is the work. That's not work. Work is something that you invest in order to have some kind of provision out of it. Something is produced from that work that is then invested back into your body and your home. Now, it might not just be financial, but there's an investment with the intent to produce something in a field. And that goes beyond just cleaning your home and meal planning. So what this looks like us now is that we ended up asking the question, what creative effort that produces provision can be stopped for 24 hours? For my husband, that was kind of an easy one because he is employed outside the home. So that was kind of easy. He doesn't do any work from Friday night through Saturday evening. Now, there have been times where he has worked on a Sunday evening to catch up on something. He hates doing it. He doesn't want to do it. But there have been times when that has happened. But for that 24 hours where we are Sabbathing, he doesn't do anything for work, for his employer. For me, my businesses, I don't do any tasks for my businesses. I have 2 businesses. One I own with 2 other women, and then there's this one that is my author brand. I don't do any tasks for these businesses on our during our 24-hour days. Now that even changed because there was a point in time where I would go right as part of my Sabbath because at the time it was me delighting, me having fun, me enjoying. I was not stewarding that as a field quite yet. And so over the years, as that creative stewardship has moved into a field fully, and not just the way that I stewarded my mind and my soul and my emotions, it moved fully into that field area. I have now stopped writing on Saturdays during because we go from Friday night through Saturday evening. I don't write during that time because what I noticed is that it was a business task. And every time I went to go do it, it just felt different. And I knew it wasn't what I should be doing there during that time. So now I don't do any business task at all, not even writing. I save the writing for during the week or on Sundays after church. We do church for us is on Sunday morning. I'm looking at my list, make sure I don't miss something. Oh, for the kids, identifying what is work for the kids. Now, it would be really easy to say that, well, their work is their schoolwork. Yes, for us, we don't classify that as their field. We classify that as them stewarding their bodies, their minds in particular, and their character. And so what we put into their field category are the areas of ownership chores. This is beyond just the tidying up. These are areas of the house that we've given them to like steward, to own, to invest in. And we do pay them for these chores. And so this is beyond just keeping the rooms clean and keeping the living areas clean. This is for my daughter. She meal plans. So I help her with this, but we're teaching her how to meal plan and budget for groceries and prepare meals and all of that. And so that's her area of stewardship. She doesn't do that on the weekends. We actually, my husband and I, make sure that the meals are pulled out and all of that because we're trying to give her a day of rest from her area of ownership. The one question I always get asked about taking a day of rest is the idea of meals. They're like, well, what about meals? What do we do for meals? Well, we make a meal and we start our Sabbath with that dinner. And then we eat leftovers for breakfast, leftovers for lunch, and then we make a meal to end our Sabbath. And so it kind of cracks me up because it seems like nobody remembers that there's such a thing as leftovers. So really, no, you keep it really simple. Nobody's cooking. Nobody's worried about the food. We're just pulling stuff out and eating it. But also, we're not legalistic either, are we, people? Making a meal yes, there is some provision in that it, feeds you, your body, but there's also stewarding your body. So, I had a friend who their Sabbath starts with breakfast on Saturday morning, and they do, a feast. They have, full-blown breakfast, brunch type deal. So pancakes and cinnamon rolls and scrambled eggs and bacon and all the things. I just think that's lovely. I think that's such a cool thing. But that's how they do it. The point here is not that we are being legalistic in what we stop or what we don't stop. We're not being legalistic in our work. What we're trying to do is reframe that a day of rest is a time for us to remember that we are not the creator. We're just his image bearers. And we get to delight in the work that we did with him throughout the week. And we get to delight in the work that we're going to do with him the next week. And that's just such a lovely privilege. And so I think when you start to see it that way as this beautiful gift, this weekly rhythm that you get to do with God, it becomes something bigger than just what's work, what's rest. No, it's bigger than that. Just to reiterate, things that don't stop. We don't stop caring for our bodies. We still have to steward those. We don't stop parenting. We still have to care for about relationships in the home. We keep the habitat tidy. We're not doing massive chores. We're just cleaning up after ourselves as we go. That's not work. That's literally just keeping yourself cleaning up after yourself. I don't know. That's probably a little bit of a tangent, but I think some of these things people worry about them and it's just they seem really obvious after you've been doing it for a bit. You're like, oh my gosh, why did I ever worry about the home being untidy or something? I know that I'm saying this and I'm kind of being well, this is obvious, you guys. But I do have to say, it took me a little bit to get there. And I think it took the repetitive showing up to it each week and going, well, yeah, this isn't work. This is just caring for your own, like stewarding your life well. Specifically, when it came to cleaning, I think once again, I had to take out cleaning as being my work, like my home cleaning chores as being my work. But I will say that we make sure that the house is in a clean state before we go into Sabbath. So we try to have the dishes cleared in the dishwasher before we start Sabbath. We try to make sure that the kids go around and they put all their items away that they've been playing with before Sabbath begins. There's just some things we try to do to give the space its own little preparation for a time of rest. We're not already in a state of disorder when we enter into a state of rest. When I shifted from thinking about things as work-life balance and instead into this rhythm of 1 day of rest and 6 days of creating, into creative stewardship of my life as a whole, when I shifted that, a couple things happened. And I think they are true for most people. When most people shift their mindset from, oh, I need to balance work and life, to I need to steward my life as a whole in a rhythm of rest and then work or creating, I think these three things become true. One, I think you get a stabilizing peace. There is just a peace that permeates your life because there's no longer the question of, am I working too much? Am I working too little? Am I doing enough to tend to this relationship? Am I doing enough to do for that thing? Am I neglecting something? All of those fears start to quiet down because you have things allocated. It's almost like a budget for your finances. If you follow Dave Ramsey, like this is his core principle. When you know where your money's going, you have a peace about it. That's why they named it financial peace. And the same thing is true for your life. When your life has a framework around it, you know, I'm working these days, I'm resting this day. There is no question of if you're working too much because everything is in its proper place. It's in its proper rhythm. And it's done from a proper posture, try saying that 3 times fast, of rest. It's creating from rest. It's not striving. It's not hustling. It's not neglecting family for the sake of work. It's not neglecting work for the sake of family. Like those two things can happen. Everything is in its proper place and it alleviates that guilt. It alleviates those questions and the tension that they bring up. The second thing it does is it allows you to make intentional decisions. This is, I think, one of the biggest benefits that came out of adopting this rhythm. I knew that 1 day a week I was not doing a specific kind of task, which meant the other 6 days of the week, that specific kind of task had to get done. And this is not just about my work. This is about all areas of stewardship of my life. When I know I only have 6 days to do these, I know I only have 6 days to tend to things. Now, that's one more day than most people do for work, but I can look at the whole of my life and say, these are the tasks I need to steward. Let me find time in these 6 days where I can steward those things. Now, you start with your anchors, sleep. That's stewarding your body. Eating, that's stewarding your body. Grooming, making sure you're taking showers. You know how many women I have heard neglecting eating or sleeping and showering for the sake of taking care of their families or taking care of their businesses. Ladies, oh, and I should put in exercise in there. See, I didn't even think about it because that's the one I always neglect. I always neglect exercise. Those things are critical to maintaining and stewarding your body. Please make time for it. So that's the whole point, right? Like, you know that has to go on the calendar. And next, we need to cultivate and tend to our homes. Those things need to go on the calendar. And then we can put the times for our fields, the things that we need to tend to for our fields. And then we can put the things that we tend to for our tables. The key thing that this does is it forces you to reckon with how much limited time you actually have. And that's where the intentionality comes into play, because when you know what you're stewarding those days, when you know that you only have these 6 days to steward it, and that you want to delight in it on the 7th day, you start prayerfully asking, what did you entrust to me, Lord, that I need to steward? Then you start saying no to some things. You say no to the good things and only yes to the best things. that fall within that creative stewardship that God's entrusted with you for this season, for right now. And you move from there. Now, I have been doing this for almost 7 years now, and I still at times get off a little bit. I sometimes can make more time for one thing than the other. I can neglect an area because another area just a little bit more fun to do. Like I mentioned, exercise is not my cup of tea, but it is something that's been entrusted to me. My body has been entrusted to me. I need to steward it well. And so I am trying to be more intentional about that decision. And, honestly, seasons shift. It feels like every 3 months with our kids, there's something new going on in their extracurriculars, in what they need from us. Even for myself, like the seasons change outside. And so there's different things that our home needs to be stewarded well. There's different seasons of life just with relationships and different things you're volunteering for. And so it's not just one and done. You don't make these decisions and then you're just done and you move on with your life. There's always a constant evaluation and slight adjustments. Somebody once told me that balancing on a tight wire is not actually completely steadiness. We tend to think of it like that. Like if we're balanced, we're completely steady in all areas. And she said that when somebody is actually walking across a tightrope, they have the pole in their hand and it slightly moves and they adjust against that. There's just a slight adjustment. And that's what's true of our lives. Like we are constantly slightly adjusting, slightly realigning to be more and more in alignment with what God has entrusted to us. This 1 day of rest and 6 days of creating does not demand perfection. It is a rhythm that asks for intentionality. And week after week, that intentionality reshapes everything. And it realigns your stewardship closer to what God has asked you to do. This week, instead of asking, how can I create more work-life balance? I encourage you instead to ask, what creative effort that produces provision can I stop for 24 hours? If you're not taking a 24-hour Sabbath yet, that's okay. If you're not even doing any kind of Sabbath practice, that's okay too. Just ask the question and see what it reveals about what you've been calling work and what you've been calling life and the tensions or the guilt or whatever it brings up by doing so. And you've heard me mention it before, but my 15-minute margin method helps you kind of identify all the areas of stewardship you're carrying and helps you identify what actually falls into that work category, what falls into that field category that you're investing in hopes of producing some kind of provision. So if you need help with this exercise, if you want something to walk you through asking this question, you can go to rachelfahrenbach.com/margin and download that free resource. Now, before we wrap up, I want to pray this over us today. Father God, in our lives that you've entrusted to us, may we steward them well, and in doing so, usher in your kingdom for our good and for your glory. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, thank you for joining me this week. I'll see you next time.